Well, welcome and thank you for joining the first webinar in the new CVFS webinar series. My name is Heather Gattney and I'm coordinating the series. At this time, we request that all participants mute themselves until the question and answer session at the end of today's discussion. During the discussion, you may ask a question through the chat feature. The hosts will answer the questions in chat as they are able to. At the end of the discussion, the hosts will also take questions. Please raise your hand and when called on, you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask your question. This webinar is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this point. A recording and transcript of this webinar will soon be available on the CVFS website. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to one of our hosts today, Bill Axon.
Thank you, Heather. I'm Bill Axon. I'm a co-host with Dirga Gamiri today. As Heather described, as an introduction, we're really gonna go kind of over the top of the whole Chitwan Valley Family Study as best we can in about 30 minutes. We're then gonna give you a quick introduction to our website, which has a lot of tools you might find useful, and then we want to have some time for a question and answer type discussion. We'll do the best we can to go kind of quickly right now. Here we go. Topics today are the motivation for the CVFS, some of the design principles, baseline measures across various domains, and then the evolving topics of the study, which go across family change and reproductive health, environmental change, attitudes and beliefs, mental health and genetics, child health, and the transition to adulthood. First topic I'll mention is the scientific motivations for the study. At the time of its launch, it was very much considered a study of the causes of family change, focused on topics like marriage timing and courtship, childbearing and contraceptive use, divorce and relationship quality, and migration and living arrangements. Over time, we evolved to study things that were about the understanding of consequences of family change. And some of the consequences that have gotten the most attention in the measures in the study include change in the natural environment, mental health, child health, and household income and assets. The Chitwan Valley Family Study was initially designed to investigate the influence of changing social contexts at a very local level on the timing of marriage, childbearing, and contraceptive use. We launched in 1995 after a couple of years of pilot studies. And then since the launch in 1995, the CVFS has expanded to study several other topics, including the ones I just mentioned. Dirga, you want to tell us some about the context in Chitwan?
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our first series of our webinar. To help understand the CVFS, let me provide you some contextual background of our study settings. I know many of you have visited or know CVFS study site, the Western Chitwan Valley, which lies in the south central part of Nepal. Until the early 1950s, this valley was covered with dense forest. The valley was opened for human settlement in 1955 and has undergone through a rapid change, particularly after late 1970s, creating a tremendous variation in social and environmental context. Scholars have conceptualized context in different ways. As an individual, socio-geophysical surroundings, which we have operationalized here as access to different community level services and information sources. In CVFS, we see context in two ways. One is spatial variation, and another other one is temporal change. For example, let's take an example of spatial variation, the level of urbanization in our study settings. The picture on the right, the city of Naranghat lies in the northwest corner of the western Chitwan, whereas the left is the southwest corner of the valley. While Naranghat is one of the busiest business hub of the country, the southwest corner of the valley is still predominantly subsistence agriculture setting. The next slide you see is again the picture of school buildings, signifies the variation in schooling in the valley. The beautiful big building is school in Bharatpur, and other school building in the southwest corner of the valley, and you can see the variation. And then this picture represents the socioeconomic variation in daily social life of children in Western Chitwan. The picture in the left, signifies the subsistence farming settings and children's daily social life in that setting. And the picture on the right, definitely shows like more in a different way. Next. Likewise, there is a huge variation in terms of transportation services, which signifies both the variation between more urbanized area and less urbanized area, as well as change over time. This one is another example of variation in change in or variation in the residential area or facilities. So this gives you the why the importance of the context, or why it is important to study the variation and change. Next, Bill will provide you a snapshot of CVF's design principles. Bill.
Yeah, and we'll cover 4 topics, each one pretty quickly. The first one will be controlled comparison design and what we mean by that with the CVFS. Multi-level measurements, whole family panel measures, and the mixed method data collection approach. Sorry, this slide has a lot going on in it. The little triangles are the selected neighborhoods in Chitwan. The area in various shades of gray there is our study area. You can see Naranghat that Durga talked about a moment ago up at the upper right of that picture. And I know that when people talk about controlled comparison, they do so meaning somewhat different things by the same words, or at least using it in a lot of different contexts. What I mean here is that we've chosen all neighborhoods from within a single area and controlled out variations that we're not interested in, including national policies, weather patterns, various aspects of the environment that are the same across this whole valley, and focused in on a very local level of variation, which is the neighborhood to neighborhood variation in our 151 selected neighborhoods, which yields 3,500 households, because we include all households in each neighborhood, over 10,000 individuals, and also 265 flora plots. And the green area around Chitwan, you can see their study area is bordered by these big rivers, and then the green area around it is mainly National Forest Reserve, and a lot of flora plots in there as well as inside the valley. When we describe multi-level measurements, we're really thinking of 3 social levels, one being the community level, as in the upper left, the household level is in the center, and the individual level is in the lower right. And as a panel study, we try to follow all 3 of these levels across time. The whole family panel study design has a few different elements that are quite relevant. We'll talk about them in a little bit of detail, each one as we go. We have every household member in the panel, and we measure their relationships with each other. We'll show you some of the benefits of that in a moment. We try to maintain representativeness of the sample over the time by using our registry system to refresh the sample. We track all migrants to follow them wherever they go and measure destinations and remittances. We have full life course measurement, tracking them through from early life to later life, and we work hard to maintain low attrition in the panel sample. So this first picture is a little diagram to show you some of the benefits of the whole family design, which is we measure everybody in the household and we keep track of everybody as they move, which allows you to study spouses, parents, children, kind of intergenerational dyads, sibling dyads, and even grandparent, grandchildren chains. As I mentioned, we also track migrants wherever they go. This includes tracking to 53 different countries, 59 different districts within Nepal. And you can see one of our interviewers using telephone to interview folks who don't any longer live in Chitwan. We also use mixed mode. Those of you who've known me for a long time know that I prefer to think of mixed methods and mixed modes as a combination of ethnography, focus groups, and survey research. You can see some poking in the arm going on the left. Little shout out to Scott Yabiku for activity spaces and the diagrams with the Google Earth stuff. Our interviewer using Caddy over the phone, and some kid anthropometrics going on in the center. When I said across the whole life course, this includes measurements of childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and old age. And I know this is going to go by kind of quickly, which is one of the reasons why we're both recording it for you to look at later and going to show you our website where these details reside. But we have a lot of measurements for each one of those different life course phases. Dear guy, I think baseline measurement from 95, 96 is back to you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, on the baseline in 95 to 96, first, as Bill mentioned, we did the sample selection. Our sample was community or the neighborhood level sample. And then we conducted neighborhood history calendar. We also did a neighborhood land use and land cover and flora mapping, household census relationship, household agriculture and wealth and income surveys, and individual surveys. By neighborhood, we mean at the beginning, we made like 5 to 15 households clustered around some, surrounded with some farmland in the southern side of the study site, whereas in the urban areas or the near Nangat, it could be a single apartment building with 5 to 15 households in it. Next. So then after we select the neighborhood, then we administer a neighborhood history calendar in 1995 that record the history of prior 50 years, which means, this whole area was open for settlement in 1955. That makes is, so what we recorded is annual neighborhood access to electricity, school health services, bus services, and many more. The retrospective history provides annual records of access to non-family services in number of minutes to walk to the nearest service. The next, after the neighborhood history calendar, we did a land use survey. That means we measure every square foot of the neighborhood and its land use. We also collected flora, diversity and abundance, and agriculture survey. Next. Yes, you can see in these pictures, the first right lower corner was the first flora data collection, and then there these counters, flora counters count each of the plant species within that sample area, and also identify the types of flora. And
are those CVFS official elephants or just borrowed elephants?
we hired them during, for the data collection. Yes. As a household interview, we initially conducted census, which means a complete list of any member of the household who lives and eats and sleeps in that household for more than most of the time in past 6 months. And then based on that list, we also collected the relationship of each member with each other member of the household. Those are very important data collection for the rest of our panel. And finally, we also conducted a household products. We call it household agriculture production, consumption, and ownership income and asset survey, which provides us a lot of information about the household. Next, Bill will continue with individual interview.
My turn, and I'll start with the individual baseline interview and move on to the individual panel stuff. At the core of our baseline individual interview topics were life histories of place of residence, marital history, childbearing, contraception, living arrangement history, education history, and work history. And then the baseline also included extensive measurement of attitudes, values, and expectations, some measures of marital experiences and relationships, some measures of literacy, media exposure, group participation, some items on religiosity, and finally some measures of parental characteristics and social networks. And this shows the life history calendar. Little shout out to various students of Lisa Pierce's who might be with us today. It's sort of a paper by Lisa that goes into this in detail, but here you can see a picture of the original calendar in use with one of our older respondents. And of course, the older the respondent, the more time-consuming and difficult completing a life history calendar would be. Next, I want to tell you about our panel design and focus a bit on the individuals. Of course, we follow neighborhoods over time, as I mentioned. We follow households over time, but we also follow individuals over time. And we do that by using our household demographic event registry. That's really the centerpiece of our panel, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Then we do repeated land use and household measures. And we've conducted large-scale individual interviews with large scale, I mean by the whole sample, 10,000 plus in 2008 with a refresh sample, and then again in 2016 to 18 with a refresh sample. The registry design is super important for understanding how the panel study works. All members of all members of a selected household in each selected neighborhood are counted each month in the registry system. And the registry system has kind of a set of measures that are continuous place-specific measurement of demographic events with a monthly precision. So in each selected neighborhood, we're keeping track of all births, all marriages, all divorces, moves in, moves out, deaths, and school enrollment. And that's what gives us this kind of place-specific event measurement with both numerators and denominators. And I'll show you in a minute, we've transitioned this across time to computer-assisted interviewing, which has helped us a lot with quality control and extending the method. And finally, the nice thing about this registry keeping track of everybody is, in addition to our panel tracking of people who were interviewed in an individual interview before, it allows us to refresh the sample in a way that maintains representativeness of Western Chitwan over time. So when we're following people across time, when we designate an interview as baseline and then follow those folks, all members of the baseline household are followed over time. And then anybody who marries one of those people becomes a member of the panel, and anybody who's born to one of those people becomes a member of the panel. And those rules are very similar to what the panel study of income dynamics uses here in the United States. And we tried to mimic those in Nepal. And each person is tracked no matter where the person moves to any place inside or outside Nepal, as we showed you in previous pictures. We use these computer-assisted interviewing tools to help us maintain high quality. They're useful for reducing interviewer error, but they also help provide paradata, which allows us to manage the survey better and allocate effort to tasks better. So those tools together reduce error that increases efficiency, but they also help us reduce bias that increase accuracy. This is a picture of one of our computer assisted interviews in process on the left, 2 people being interviewed with the machine on a laptop. And here in the insert, you can see the actual Nepalese question look that the interviewer is seeing, and then the English translation of that right next to it. We've worked hard to try and keep panel attrition under control. Natalie Williams, great to see you, and thank you for your help with this paper, which documented the attrition levels across 10 years, where we kept household attrition below 2%. So we're retaining 98% of households. An individual level attrition below 8%, so that we're retaining more than 92% of individuals. I think there are a handful of tactics that prove really useful in this. One is our regular cycle of visiting everybody that keeps us in touch. Another is our extensive use of contact people, because we have a whole family design. We can use some family members to help us find other family members. And then the mix of in-person plus telephone interviewing that allows us to keep contact with people as they move. There are 3 different kinds of topics we want to tell you a little bit about that have been added to the CVFS since 2008. I'm going to lead off with the first one before turning it over to Dirga, and I'll just remind everybody that in our webinar series, we're going to have webinars in each one of these in the coming weeks. I'll talk about the life histories of mental health and the DNA collection first, and then Dirga will talk a little bit about the child health and the transition to adulthood work. So in 2016 to 18, we collected life histories of mental health from 10,714 members of the CVFS, 15 to 59, again, refreshed to be representative of Western Chitwan in 16 to 18. We used an instrument that is called the Composite International Diagnostic Interview, a Nepal specific version that creates clinically validated diagnostic measures of depression, alcohol use disorder, anxiety, PTSD, panic, bipolar, and intermittent explosive disorder. We used a life history calendar method to help us improve reporting and accuracy of the onset and timing of onset of those conditions. We're actually, in 2 weeks from today, going to present in more detail both about the mental health measures and about the way we use life history calendar to improve reporting. And this data collection also successfully collected saliva-based DNA from 10,300 of the 10,714. So also, this is my favorite picture, is our respondents working hard to fill tubes of saliva before we ship that up to Kathmandu, extract DNA, put it on dry ice, air freight it over to Boston, take it to a place called the Broad Institute, where they do quality control checks on that DNA. We scored among the best they've received from anywhere in the world. And then they do genotyping on that. We have a webinar scheduled in a little bit where Coulter Mitchell's going to tell you a little bit more about the genetic design, but I do want to comment to all of you who are interested in the data set that I think this is one of the most potentially powerful parts of the CVFS going forward. As the science of genetics grows and enhances all this genetic data, we have full genetic data on all 10,300, and we have a kind of unique design element, which is we have mothers, father, kid triads from a whole lot of families. Dirga, all yours.
Okay, just one minor correction, that is all of these pictures are not from our real respondents, either on the child data collection or here. These are just pictures taken from other people.
Actors portraying what we actually do.
And we don't have data on the actual people. This is just for pictures purpose. Okay.
Thank you, Dirga.
With that correction, in 2016 again, yes, in CVFS we have been collecting the information or data on childhood using our life history calendar and other survey questionnaire. But beginning of 2016, we started a more focused observational and health-related studies, child health studies. And in 2016, we collected anthropometric measures such as birth weight, height, mother report of general health, the healthcare utilization for common illness, immunization, school enrollment, living arrangement, child weight, all those anthropometric measures from 3,314 children of age 0 to 17. We call.
What you're telling me, dear guys, even these children are actors portraying respondents.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. This was during training, so yeah, and these are not actual respondents. So we collected anthropometric measures from 3,314 children 0 to 17-year-old. I think this is a very good, large enough or significant enough cohort of children that we have these anthropometric measures. Likewise, we collected anemia score from 2,300 children 5 to 17-year-old. We didn't go to the too young kids for anemia. In 2019, I have a question?
No, I was just going to say we're going to come back to all of this in more detail in webinar, but I forgot that you're going to talk about it in 19. Go ahead.
Yeah. In 2019, we repeated this same thing, and then we interviewed 3,656 children aged 0 to 17, and have the anthropometric measures, and added 607 new additional children aged 5 to 17 who did not have anemia measures in 2016. So along with the children, we also have mothers interview. All of the mother of those children were interviewed in both of the time. Next, we are also planning to repeat this survey in 2022. We already have some funding for that, so it will be a time series data on children health in CVFS within CVFS sample. Another exciting and new study is a panel study of transition to adulthood. This study has again a significant cohort of like 3,554 adults, young adults, 15 to 24, which is again a significant cohort. And this study is significant in two ways. Number one, we are trying to collect information that are considered to be sensitive in this context for a long time, and we did not, attempted to do. That is those are sexual experience, contraceptive use. We did collect information on, but not that detail. Similarly, alcohol use.
Not for people having premarital sex. That would be a big difference.
Yeah. That was seriously considered considered as sensitive, and we were not ready to do that. But the only reason we are doing it is this is all web based. So luckily today we launched this study. We released those lines today, and then
like literally today.
Yeah,
literally. Like we didn't plan it that way; it just happened that way. Literally, this study launched.
Yeah, we just launched this. Before noon, we launched this study, and we are hoping respondents will start, responding the web survey from tomorrow morning in Nepal time.
Give us a few webinars, and we'll give you an update.
Yeah. Then finally, yes, CVFS has been very instrumental in terms of human capacity capacity building, and because of CVFS, Institute for Social and Environment Research has been able to develop a wealth of knowledge and skill on cutting-edge data collection method, including various computer-assisted data collection technique, wave survey, biomarker sample collection, and more.
So Dirga, we're looking forward to some webinars also that are not about CVFS, but do use the same staff and infrastructure to accomplish data collection goal.
So yeah, it has been very instrumental to develop the research capacity, both in terms of human resource and infrastructure. Thank you. Goes
Thank
to
you.
Heather.
Yep. Heather, I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn it to you.
So I am now going to show you how our CVFS website is organized. Here is how you can navigate to the website. And we're getting started here on the home page, and there are two things that I would like to point out for you on this page. The first is our short, about 2-minute long video here that we have that provides an overview of the Chitwan Valley Family Study. And this is great to share with any new data users that we might be working with. And then the other thing I'd like to point out here is our study diagram. So I'm going to click on that right now. And now we're on the study diagram page. So we created this diagram to help new users sort of visualize the breadth of the CVFS data collection. So that would be the extent of the data available across the individual and household and community levels, as well as the extent of the data available across time. To see all of the data available on the study diagram, you do have to use this scroll bar down here at the bottom of the screen, or you can click this link and a PDF will open and you can size it to fit your screen perfectly. So all of our data are archived at ICPSR. For those of you who don't know, ICPSR is a unit within ISR at U of M that maintains the data archive for the social and behavioral sciences. So all of these boxes here on the data diagram, these represent data files. And the numbers and letters here, these represent the ICPSR data file name. And so we just have those here to help the user correctly identify the file on the ICPSR website. For this example here, the census file is called DS3 on the ICPSR website. The color of these boxes here on the diagram is also significant. The blue box means that it is a public use file and you can go to the ICPSR website and immediately download and start working with these blue box files. Whereas the green means that the data is restricted access and requires then a restricted data use agreement with ICPSR. And if you were to see an orange box on the diagram, that just means that the data collection is either in process or planned for the future. So now I am going to click on one of these and show you what happens. So if you click on a box, it'll take you to a page with information about the data collection. So we've got info about the data collection methods here. You can download code books, you can download the questionnaires, and we also have a link to the ICPSR website where you can access the data. And if I scroll up here, you'll be able to see what page we're on. This is the individual level data page. And it has a table like this one here that I just showed you for every individual level data file that we have available on the ICPSR website. And you can also see this information for files at the household level and the community level here by clicking these links. So the other thing I wanted to point out here is this data access page. So I'm going to click on that. This page has instructions for accessing the CVS data through ICPSR. It also has instructions for analyzing the data directly on the ICPSR website, which you can do with our public use files. And then we also have some general information about the steps the CVFS takes to protect human subjects. And some of this text here might be useful to you in terms of writing grant applications or maybe if you're working on your IRB applications. So out of these three, I am just going to click here on this data access page. Lots of good information here. So we start off by first explaining that the CVFS data are organized under two different studies at ICPSR. Most of our files can be found under this study number 4538, and then a smaller set of files can be found under study number 36755 here. Now, the only reason that we have the files split between two different studies on the ICPSR website is because of differences in the funding. So basically, the data collected here under 4538 were funded by NIH, whereas these files, these data collections were funded by the UK government. So I just think that's important to point out. If you're on a page and you're not finding what you're looking for, make sure you go to the other page and check that out. Maybe that's where you need to be. So down here, we also explain the differences between public use and restricted use data files. And if we scroll down a little bit further, we have instructions here for applying for access to the restricted data through ICPSR. Now, there are two different methods for accessing the restricted use data through ICPSR. The first one is this secure dissemination method, where you're basically saving the files on your own computer. And then the second method is the virtual data enclave, and that's where you're accessing the files and analyzing them on a virtual machine. Now, both of these methods involve an online application process, and you would do that on the ICPSR website, but you can have a look at what that application looks like on our website. So I'm going to click here at the secure dissemination method. And so you can see here that we have screenshots from ICPSR's online application at each step in the process. So if you want to see what the application looks like before you start working on it, you can come to our website and have a look right here. So next, I am going to show you our publications page. Now this page has a list of publications using the CVFS data. The publications are organized in chronological or reverse chronological order. And at least for journal articles, we try to have links to both the journal article and the free PubMed version of the article.
There are two quick interruptions I'll make. One is, during the slideshow, we covered some topics like calendars or the registry system, and there's papers in here about those. And the other is, many of you are using the data. If you publish papers that are not on this list, please tell us so we can add them. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep, and you could email one of us directly, or you could also navigate to this about page where we have a contact us form, and you could let us know that way too. Okay, so the last thing I would like to show is our webinar series page here. Now, this is where you can see all of our upcoming webinars all the way up until May of next year. And you can register in advance for any of these. So for example, Bill mentioned this, in 2 weeks, we'll be doing a webinar on our recent mental health data collection. And then in 4 weeks, we'll be doing a webinar on linking different CVFS data files. So you can go to our website right now and register for any of these. We'll also continue to send email invitations for the webinars. So if you would like to receive those, just come on over to our website and you can sign up to be on our email list right here. Also on this webinar series page, we have a webinar feedback link. So following today's discussion, I'm actually going to send a link to this page. I'm going to send this to everyone. And, this is our first ever webinar. We would really like it to be as helpful and as useful to the most people as possible. So we'd love to have your feedback, and not only on this first webinar, but all of our webinars that we have planned. If you have a suggestion for a topic that we should cover in a webinar, you can let us know right here on this feedback page. And if you have any questions that maybe we didn't get to during the question and answer session today, you can always ask that question right here in the comments page. We'll get back to you just so long as you let us know who you are. That's one thing required. Just let us know your email address so we can answer your question. And I think that is it. I'm going to stop screen sharing now and hand it over to Bill.
So keeping with our pledge to end exactly by 3 o'clock, we have about 15 minutes for discussion. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask us a question. Durga, Heather, or I will try to answer if it's in our domain. We might call on some of our friends if it's not. And also feel free to use the chat box if that feels better. All questions will be welcome.
I have a question. Maybe you guys will cover this in the linking data panel, but I'm kind of curious about the relationship grid from 96 and kind of the addition of family members in 08 when you do the second baseline. Is there any other way to kind of understand the relationships of people coming? Oh, sorry, I think my Wi-Fi went out for a second. Relationships of people coming into the study or out. Yeah, like how can we continue to like understand those relationships?
Yeah, Emma, thanks for asking that question. One answer from me is you can, but it's a lot of work. And I'm sorry about that. I wish it were easier. As far as I know, every family panel study that allows multiple family members in the study, but then tries to follow them over time and allows them to get, married and add new people or divorced and separate and stuff like that, has these kind of problems. And I'm not sure there's problems, just the reality of following families across time. So Durga, you'll have to correct me on getting the years right, but we do a family relationship grid in 95, an individual interview in 96, then we launched the registry system. And the relationship is grid because it links every person in the household to every other person. We never use a household head type of designation to kind of simplify those relationships. But that leaves them in their full complexity. One person's brother is another person's father, is another person's child. And so that's a little complicated right inside one of them. And then Durga, in 2008, when we refresh the sample, we do another relationship grid, right?
Yep.
And so two things are happening if you do a fresh relationship grid, right? One of them is people's relationships have changed. So if a person was, say, single and 17 at the 1996 individual interview, and we follow them, they get married. That shows in their individual record, but their spouse also might be with them in the household. And then they might have a child. And that shows in their individual history, but it might also, show. And then in 2008, you have a kind of update of who all is in the household, but now we're adding new households that weren't there before because we refreshed the sample, but we might also be adding new people who are in that household, but not because they married somebody or were born to somebody, but for some other reason. And so, so Durga, I don't think it's unfair to say it's a little complicated.
I add a little more on that. But in 2009, since we switched from paper pencil-based data collection to computer-assisted data collection, we updated the relationship every month. So that data do exist, but as you said, it has not been extracted and created for it in it needs some work to make that happen. But it's very challenging how you use that. And then if you have a wonderful idea, that might be a one possible area to explore it.
Yeah, so and it is really cool data that I think if you're a sociologist, depending on your interest, epidemiology, psychology, so forth, there's very cool things you could do it, but it's going to take some work to get there. And if you do the work, though, these things can be measured in these data. Emma, did that do okay? And by the way, not a bad topic for a webinar because it is a little complicated. And Emily has agreed to do our data linking one. Notice I was too chicken to do that. But I think Emily, we're not really planning to cover. Well, maybe we will touch on this because you'll talk about parent to child linking and some stuff like that, I suppose.
Yeah, I certainly am planning to talk about the relationship grids. So if other folks have specific questions that you or topics you'd like to see covered in that webinar, please go ahead and make suggestions in the chat, or you can shoot me an email and I'll do my best to incorporate those.
Thanks, Emily. We promise we try and help Emily. That doesn't mean we'll get everything right the first time, but we'll give it a try. Ursula, you asked another awesome question, and Natalie Williams, I don't know if you're paying attention to the chat box here, but the question is, can you say a little bit more about the type of data we collected on armed violence and whether these can be analyzed longitudinally? Natalie, Dirga, I'll give a quick answer and let either of you fix it as you wish. I think we collected some lovely data at kind of a spatial level of did this occur or not and where did it happen, about things like gun battles, bomb blasts, killings, kidnappings, beatings. I do work on mental health now, and it turns out that having a beating nearby your neighborhood has some long-lasting effects if you were a child at the time that occurred. Can you study these longitudinally? Yes, during the period of armed conflict. Natalie, Dirga, I'm thinking we've got 6 good years of data points across these neighborhoods. And maybe you would say 8 years because some of the tails are cut off because these events didn't occur. But of course, Ursula, part of the issue is in some years, some events don't occur. And so, you know, what longitudinally means in that, I guess, in those years they didn't occur, you could study. Natalie, Dirga, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so we have information on all these type of events, and we have them at the exact date and the exact place. So it depends on what you mean by can use it longitudinally, but we do have the date and place of each one of them, like the exact GPS coordinate. Bill mentioned that we don't have that information after the conflict ended, which is true, of course, when conflicts end, like violence continues. That information exists within Nepali text in these human rights yearbooks that are, the information is collected every year. So if someone wants to come up with the cash to translate that in English and digitize it, it's there for the having from 2007 on to today.
Thank you for being so blunt, Natalie. I'll go on for Ursula's sake and say it could just be effort. You could just do the work, but it's definitely feasible. It doesn't have to just be cash, but it would take some work. And thanks, Natalie, for reminding me that, of course, armed conflict isn't the only source of violence going on for folks. We'll talk about this a little bit in 2 weeks. Our mental health instrument, because it measures PTSD, that portion of the measurement begins with an inventory of what we call potentially traumatic experiences. And that includes many kinds of violence events. And those are measured not at a neighborhood level, but at an individual level, where if an individual says, yes, this one happened to me, then we ask, when was the first time that happened? Did it happen more than once? That kind of thing. And so there's a little bit of life history there that can also be studied with respect to violent events of some types. More questions?
There is a question here about where you can find a sort of a list of the restricted data use files before you apply for access to those from ICPSR. So I might just screen share real quick again to point out the website. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Great. So here's our study diagram, and I would start here. So all of the restricted use files are listed here on the study diagram, and they are green in color. And I point you here because we also have the public use files listed here, and so that might be useful to check out before you apply for the restricted use version. And then also on our website, you can download the code book for all of our restricted use files. And then of course, if you went to the ICPSR website, they have a list of all of our data files there, and they're clearly labeled restricted versus public use files.
Dear guy, I don't know if you noticed Austin's question in the chat box, but you're going to love this one. And I know several of my colleagues around this photo have opinions on this. In fact, Austin, it's a topic that I think it's fair to say I've been in several arguments about this. Sort of, if you're going to measure a time series of something, and Austin picked migration, would you rather at the individual level measure it with the household registry data or with the life history calendar data? And it turns out they have some super interesting pros and cons, Austin. I'll comment for my work on marital histories. Actually, sometimes I prefer the life history calendar data. The life history calendars only give you person year events, only annual level precision, whereas the household registry data will give you month level precision. The household registry data, Dirga, one con that I'll say is that it includes people who aren't interviewed in the individual interview. That is, if you're in that household during that time, we will measure you. And if you arrived, we'll measure that you moved in. And if you stay there for a while, we'll measure you. And then if you move away, we'll measure that you moved away again. But that wouldn't necessarily mean that you could link that to any other data, because you might not be in any other data collection. Dirga, you want to make a comment before I invite anybody else in the audience to make a comment about the super interesting topic of life history calendars versus the household registry?
Yeah. I mean, it also depends on like yes, a life history calendar. It has annual records, and if you are studying anything that is seasonal in nature, for example, you take an example of migration. If there is a seasonal migration, usually, seasonal migration is to go to India. If you want to study that, then I would say, household registry is much better. Yeah, much better and much more appropriate than the life history calendar. So it depends on what your research question is and what your interest is. That I would.
Yeah, Austin, my favorite thing about all these questions is the first answer is it depends. Coulter said he was having a nostalgia moment. This kind of question brings me nostalgic memories of discussions with this about this with several of you. Natalie, Coulter, Sarah, Emily. Anybody else want to enter in on this one?
Yeah.
Well, we got 2 minutes left. We're going to end
only 2 minutes left, you guys. Yeah.
So yeah, there is
Natalie wants to give it a crack in our final couple minutes.
I'll drop in. I mean, it also depends on what time period you're looking at. So there's the yearly for the life history calendar, and this monthly for moving forward. If you want to look in the past, then before 1996, then yeah, look at the life history calendar. And if you want to look at how things change, then you can look at both and compare them. Comparing them's harder when you're comparing yearly observations to monthly observations, but you can do that. And then instead of having 25 years of data, which is astounding, you have 75 years of data if you go back to some of these people's date of birth.
Sahara, I'm going to quick answer your question before we say goodbye, and that is eats and sleeps in the household most of the time over whatever time interval we're using. So if it's a 1 month period for the household registry, it has to be most of the time in the last month that they have ate and slept in the household to be a household member. So wonderful to see so many of you. Dirga, we're out of time. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Does everybody else feel better if like they're gonna do that to each
Yeah,
other? It's so wonderful to see so many of you. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. I hope you're able to join us again, and thank you to several of you who've already agreed to do presentations in our series coming up. Appreciate that as well. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and look forward to seeing you again soon.